Good evening. I've been working at Court TV for a long time, covered hundreds of trials through the years, and none of them are pretty. Most of them are murder trials. They are absolutely tragic and heartbreaking. But there are some that are just more gruesome, more horrifying than others. And the trial we've been covering this week out of Tennessee, one of the worst in the history of this network. And that's saying a lot. And we're talking about a man, not a kid, a man who took the lives of his parents and didn't just kill them, dismembered them, decapitated, boiled his mother's head in a crock pot. So disturbing, so difficult for everyone involved. The victim's family, who were also family members of the defendant, by the way. But how difficult to hear all of these details of the horror that this lovely couple went through. A couple that took care of this man, Joel Guy Jr., grown man, being supported and loved by his parents. And when finally they want to enjoy the golden years of their lives and be able to retire with some money that they set aside, they're like, listen, you know, you're almost 30 years old. It's time for you to maybe get a job. And that's the motivating factor that created all this horror, all of this horror. And then you have 12 people, 12 strangers who get that notice in the mail, and they've got to show up at the courthouse. And you don't know what's going to happen, right? What kind of case? What is it? Is it a car accident case? No, not even close. It's the most horrific week that they've probably ever endured. But today, those 12 people spoke. They spoke loudly, uttering the words guilty time after time after time, bringing justice and bringing a verdict. It's my biggest moment of the day.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Joel Michael Guy, guilty of first-degree premeditated murder of Joel Guy Sr.
Count number 2, please.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Joel Michael Guy, guilty of first-degree premeditated murder of Lisa Guy.
Count number 3.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Joel Michael Guy, guilty of first-degree felony murder of Lisa Guy.
Count number 4.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Joel Michael Guy, guilty of first-degree felony murder of Joel Guy Sr.
Count number 5.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Joel Michael Guy, guilty of felony murder of Lisa Guy.
Count number 6.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Joel Michael Guy, guilty of abuse of a corpse of Joel Guy Sr.
And count number 7.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Joel Michael Guy, guilty of abuse of a corpse of Lisa Guy.
And I'll tell you what, those masks that you saw everyone wearing in the gallery, not hiding what those folks were feeling. And again, justice for them, but it's not closure. You know, you never get better. But at least they were delivered a slice of justice today. Let's bring in Court TV legal correspondent Chanley Painter, who joins us tonight from Knox County, was inside the courtroom covering this whole case, this whole horrific case from start to finish, joins us tonight. Take us to the moment, Chanley, the moment that all those faces and those eyes that we saw in the gallery received justice today.
What a moment it was, Vinny, inside the courtroom, and more family of the victims there gathering, crammed in on those first few rows in the gallery reserved for them as we sat in silence, waiting for the jury to enter the courtroom. I noticed the defendant expressionless, sitting there waiting for the jury to enter, and as we stood, they filed in. Remember, the jury is spread out in the jury box and in the gallery. So they come in, they walk to their assigned seats. None of them made eye contact with anyone, not the defendant or the family in the courtroom. And then as the foreperson read the verdict, it was like the family melted. You can see their reactions. Like you said, even with the mask on, you can tell that this is something they've been waiting for 4 years. And something interesting happened around count number 3. the jurors who were across the aisle in the gallery, they've been sitting across from the family the entire trial, started to look towards the family and nod their head to the family. So especially juror number 10, who's been non-verbally communicating a lot by nodding her head, turned to the family like, that's for you. That was for you. And then as the jury was dismissed, Vinny, they got up, and all of them that were in the gallery that walked by the family turned to look and nod at the family as they left the courtroom. It was a momentous moment and something that I've really never seen in a courtroom.
And it's so important. It's so important for the family, and you don't get your loved one back. But at the end of the day, this is all you have. You have an opportunity to make sure that justice is served, and that jury did that. The evidence obviously overwhelming, but it's still a hurdle for prosecutors to get there and for a jury to get there. You mentioned a lot about the victims in this case, Chanley. Let's take a listen to some of these very touching victim impact statements.
My kid's childhood was taken away. I am angry for my dreams being destroyed. But I'm not the only one that's been affected. This has impacted my kids, and for that I will never be able to forgive. I rest easy knowing that God is okay with my choice not to forgive someone that has murdered my parents. I had to spend the last 4 years saving my kids' soul, their spirits, and their hearts. I have spent the last 4 years cleaning up a mess. No one will ever know what it's like to be a child having to hear that your grandmother's head was cooking in a pot because the person that did it had the perfect childhood. He, especially not a man, with that childhood. And on a super selfish note, you will never know, not meaning you, like meaning what it is like to have to tell your children that their grandparents have been chopped up and put in acid. Can my kids ever trust again? Would I ever really be able to trust again? I was always so proud of Lisa, and I told everyone that she was the best stay-at-home mom. I mourn for my dad, and know I keep talking about Lisa. I mourn terribly for my dad, I do. But I grieve and rage for Lisa. I rage for her from the mother's point of view. I cry for her because I wonder if when she realized the love of her life, the only son she had, the child that she gave her entire life to was about to murder her, I wonder if at that moment when her heart was broken, did she even fight?
Wow. Chanley, there's victim impact statements, and she took us there and described things and talked about things that I've been covering trials for years that you don't think about. That was unbelievable.
Yeah. It was. And sitting in there in the courtroom, Vinny, in that moment, when she said that, I looked immediately to the defendant. This was his mother. This is someone who worked her whole life to support him. And I said, maybe I'll notice a little break. Maybe he'll blink. Maybe he'll do something to show that he's a human. I didn't see anything at all from him. And just to realize the loss to that family, that she wouldn't even fight, seeing her son attacking her, that's unbelievable to me. And to sit in there in that courtroom, your heart goes out to that family. And it didn't surprise me that the jurors felt an affinity towards the family. They sat there next to them all week too, and nodded and said, "This is for you," as they left the courtroom, and nothing from the defendant.
And again, from this trial and from what we've learned, there was no reason for the mother to even think that something like this could happen, that her son would be capable of this.
Right, nothing that was really into evidence and testimony in front of this jury that would sort of maybe explain why he would feel this way towards his parents, who, by all accounts from the testimony, has taken care of him his whole life, supported him his whole life, according to his sister there, Michelle, saying he had the perfect childhood. He had everything he wanted. He was able to live and be a student for years and years, and all because of his parents. So there was really nothing for the jury to even think about as to why, other than the motive the prosecution put forth was that he's just greedy and wanted this money, $500,000 life insurance
Entitled.
policy.
He felt entitled. Like,
There you
I
go.
should get this. This is mine. They should be taking care of me. Why should I have to work? Why should I have to do anything? Unbelievable.
You're exactly right.
Let's take a listen to another one of Joel Sr.'s daughters who spoke today.
Dad and Lisa were wonderful. They were larger than life. They were so happy. They were such really good people. And they loved him. They loved him so much. They loved all of us. And for anyone to do what he did, I don't understand it. He has taken something from myself, from my children, his Dad and Lisa's grandchildren, my husband, everyone in our family. He has taken something from us that we'll never get back. We will. I pray that we can move on from this and that we can put this behind us. I pray that my children are not going to be scarred for life from this. The tears that's come from them, the nightmares.
This thing transcends generations of that family. That is it's so heartbreaking to hear. You know, the other part of this, Chandler, you think about this couple, right? And what their lives were. You know, you raise your daughters, and then they have families and children, and then you have this son together, and you raised him, but you're still sort of raising him. And now you've reached the point where, hey, now it's our time. You know, we had our honeymoon at some point, but now it's our time to okay, I'm going to stop working. Maybe we'll travel a little bit, and we'll really get to enjoy our grandchildren and our family. And that's what they wanted to do. And that was taken away from them, and it was taken away from their daughters and their grandchildren. And it can't be replaced. It's such a special time, a special moment, and it's been taken away. And it didn't faze him at all.
It didn't, and I'm thinking, well, maybe I'm not shocked that he has no reaction, because all week long during this trial, he hasn't had any overt reactions, any sign of remorse. It's just very cold, stoic looks from the defendant. And you raise a good point. I mean, this was a couple, they've been married for 33 years. Their only child together being Joel Guy Jr., and they wanted to retire. They wanted to move to Hawkins County here in Tennessee, where Joel Sr. grew up and where he graduated high school. They had a family home there. And the interesting part about that, though, Vinny, even in the closing argument, the prosecutor saying that while the family did intend to stop financially supporting Joel Guy Jr. by at least Christmas of 2016, that even still Lisa Guy was hunting for a job even still, because she had so much love for her son. She didn't want to just completely cut him off, but she wanted to keep supporting him in that way. And I think it's also important to note the family, those victim impact statements we keep playing, that was special. That was a request for today, Vinny, because family from all over, from Louisiana, from New York, were there this week for the trial. And so the judge wanted to make sure while everyone was there, they had an opportunity to speak today.
It's important. It's such an important part of the whole process. And it makes, if did any of the jurors stay for any of that, or did they leave? Because I think it's satisfying for them as well if they stay and they hear the victim's family speak. Did that happen?
That's a great question, because we do see that sometimes. A couple of jurors will walk back into the courtroom just to hear sentencing, hear the family. That didn't happen today. Not sure if they were even told they had the opportunity, or maybe they didn't want to, but they all left. This was just the family in the courtroom, media in the courtroom, and of course the defendant and his attorneys in the courtroom during the victim impact statements, and the judge telling the family that this is for him, this is for the judge. That's why the family didn't turn and look towards Joel Guy Jr. directly or say anything directly to Joel Guy Jr., because the judge asked them to only speak towards him because it was his decision what the sentencing would ultimately be.
All right, when we come back, we're going to get to that sentencing. And wow, what a job by the judge today as well. I mean, just impressive, heartfelt, real is what it was. We'll be right back.
I do receive the victim impact testimony from the family. As a judge, I'm required to make sentences based upon the law and the evidence in the case. Your emotion is completely understandable, and your pain is completely understandable. As a judge, that cannot have any influence on the decision that I make. But I'm also a human being, so I want you to know that you do have my sympathy. I know this has been very difficult. If I weren't the judge and I were a friend, I would spend a lot of time sitting down and talk to you, but I am the judge, so it would be inappropriate for me to be your counselor. The one thing I will say to the family is several of you have expressed how your faith has played a role in how you're dealing with this. So in your faith tradition, you can read in Romans 5, where Scripture says, where sin did abound, grace did much more abound. And so it's my prayer to you that you will find God's abounding grace to help you get through this. But you do have my sympathy.
You know, there are judges who have different approaches to their job and their position that they have when they sit on the bench. And my father was a judge, and I think this judge shares some traits with my dad, which is being human and understanding that you are dealing with people. He understands, you know, I gotta get to the law, and I have to do what I have to do, and that's ultimately my job. But my job is also to deal with real people who are going through difficult times and to share moments of humanity. And we don't see it all the time. And I don't want to be critical of judges that don't do it that way. But when I see a judge that does take the extra step, I think it's worth noting and it's worth appreciating. Because for a judge, they're on the bench every day. But for people who come before the judge and people who are in the courtroom, this is many times the worst time of their life, or recalling the worst times of their life. And to help them through it, wow. Let's take a look at the judge now delivering his sentence for Joel Guy Jr., who I don't know how to describe him other than really a monster.
Joel Michael Guy and docket number 110145, after being tried by a jury of peers of the first-degree premeditated murder of Joel Michael Guy, the court now sentenced you to life in prison in the Tennessee Department of Corrections. Count number 2, after being found guilty by a jury of peers of the first-degree premeditated murder of Lisa Guy, I now enter sentence of life in prison in the Tennessee Department of Corrections. Count number 3 is a first-degree felony murder during the perpetration of first-degree premeditated murder of Lisa Guy. The court now sentences you to life in prison in that count to merge into count number 2. Count number 4 is first-degree felony murder during the perpetration of theft of Joel Guy Sr. The court sentences you to life in prison in Tennessee Department of Corrections. That will merge into count number 1. Count number 5 is the first-degree felony murder during the perpetration of theft of Lisa Guy. The court sentences you to life in prison. That will merge with count number 2. That will be the court sentence.
And again, still unfazed by all of it. You know, at some point, I know he's expecting it, but still, you're listening to someone tell you that for the rest of your life, you're going to be locked up. Let's bring back in Court TV legal correspondent Chanley Painter. Chanley, one of the questions a lot of people have in this case is, was death ever on the table here? Was it ever considered? Because, you know, he got the maximum, and the maximum was life. He's not going to get parole. He's done. He'll die behind bars. But was the death penalty ever talked about for this case?
That's a great question, because the prosecution under Tennessee law has a certain amount of time after they indict an individual to file notice of seeking the death penalty. And they chose not to do that in this case. No explanation given, no comment there. So this option for the judge is a mandatory life sentence, and it can be with or without parole. Under Tennessee law, he'll be considering that. We know that the prosecution is going to ask, based on the press conference today, going to ask for life, the 2 consecutive sentences, which would be 102 years to serve. So basically a life sentence. He's never getting out of prison. But that's a great question. And a lot of people, especially this week during the trial, hearing the evidence in this case, are asking, why didn't the prosecution file this as a death penalty case?
Yeah, it's for some prosecutors, it's a difficult decision, and it's a personal decision, and they have to make. And you talk about worst of the worst. I mean, this is bad. You're talking about your own parents. You're talking about the heinous nature of what was done here. So clearly, I think legally it would have, fulfilled whatever requirements were needed. But it comes down to a choice. One more time, getting back though to this defendant. During the course of the trial, I saw him smile a couple times. Briefly, but was there anything happening when the cameras weren't on that we didn't see? Anything you noticed from that gives us some indication as to how this man did what he did to his mom, to his dad?
No, Vinny, I mean, he was the same off camera as we see him on camera. And he comes into the courtroom, he's carrying a file, probably about that thick, under his arm. He has a little pep in his step in the morning when he walks into the courtroom, and he'll communicate with his attorneys every now and then. He's nice to the bailiffs who tell him to get up or do this or do that. He seems to be a good inmate, but other than what we've seen up close on our cameras, that's really all we can tell. And we only really hear his voice when he was maybe answering a question from the judge on the record about testifying, and of course the jailhouse phone call where we can hear him kind of naturally talking to one of his best friends, but no indication of really how he would be outside of the courtroom.
Let's take a listen, speaking of outside the courtroom, let's take a listen to the Knox County District Attorney speaking about what happened and reaction to all of this.
Today, we achieved justice for Lisa and Joel Guy Sr. It is my hope that we were able to provide just a small amount of comfort and closure to the family. I'd like to thank the members of the jury for their hard work on this case, for their dedication and their professionalism. This was a very difficult trial to sit through, and they were very attentive throughout. At sentencing, my office will be asking for 2 life sentences to be imposed by the jury. We would ask that they run consecutively for a total of 102 years of service time. As you're aware, this crime was horrific for the family, and it was very emotional for my prosecutorial staff as well. I'd like to sincerely thank the Knox County Sheriff's Office, especially Officer Jeremy McCord, for his hard work and dedication throughout this case and over the last 4 years. I'd also like to thank prosecutors in my office, Leslie Nacios and Hector Sanchez, for their dedication in both preparing and presenting this very difficult case. And lastly, I'd like to thank Kara Hodge for the care and compassion that she has shown this family throughout the process. The citizens of Knox County can rest safer tonight knowing that the criminal justice process worked to remove Joel Guy Jr. from our community. Thank you.
Chanley, I was thinking, we know how difficult this has been on the family for the last 4 years, but how about for the investigators and the prosecutors? I feel like they should almost have an opportunity to give a victim impact statement as well.
I agree with that, Vinny. I mean, you could just tell in their voices on the witness stand offering testimony in this trial, Just take Detective McCord, for example. You could tell in his voice he's still emotionally affected by what he walked into on that November day in 2016. He even said it was a nightmare. It was gut-wrenching. He still has haunted dreams about it. You can't imagine what they've gone through. And then the 4 years. I mean, this is 4 years later. They've been working on this case. Now they finally get a sense of justice. And I just want to mention that even at the verdict and even during the victim impact statements today, those investigators, those detectives, the forensic experts who worked on this case were standing in the back of the courtroom all morning long for this. They showed up today, because again, this meant something to them. This is a case, I'm sure, like they've never had and they will never forget and maybe never will see again.
Yeah, amazing job by everyone involved in this case, from the judge to the attorneys to the prosecutor. Everyone really did great work and delivered justice under difficult circumstances.